Hamas says senior leader Ismail Haniyeh has been killed in an Israeli strike on Tehran after he was participating in the inauguration ceremony for the new Iranian president. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Dan Williams, who joins us now from Jerusalem. Dan, well, it has been quite an eventful evening in the Middle East. Maybe let's just start with what we know about the killing of Ismail Haniyeh.
Right now, the reports, as reflected by Bloomberg reporting, are entirely from within Iran. Ismail Haniyeh, a major figure in Hamas, its political leader, was apparently in Iran. We know he was Iran to meet the supreme leader along with his counterpart from Palestinian Islamic Jihad. This is another major faction in the Gaza Strip that has been battling Israel since October. PIJ is allied to Hamas. Hamas is really the dominant faction in the Gaza Strip. From what we understand, an explosion, possibly an airstrike, struck a building that was housing Haniyeh, killing him and a bodyguard.
And Dan, from what we understand, Ismail Haniyeh, obviously the leader of Hamas, was one of those who would have been actively engaged in those ceasefire discussions. We've been talking about the many attempts at getting a ceasefire deal over the line. How is this likely to impact the Gaza ceasefire talks?
That's an excellent question. It's very hard to know how to answer it. On the face of it, Hamas, really with this unprecedented attack, it's had attacks on its leaders before. This would be the first, to my knowledge, at least published, of a major Hamas leader on Iranian soil. And Hamas will certainly be doing its recalculations. It's worth noting here that Israel so far has not confirmed this attack, unlike the attack in Beirut just a few hours prior that targeted a major figure in Hezbollah, an Iranian group functioning within Lebanon and attacking Israel from Lebanon. Now, on the one hand, Hamas might be expected to hunker down, to perhaps even call off the talks on the hostages. On the other, there is a theory, certainly one that's been circulated by the Israeli government, that the more Hamas feels military pressure, the more its surviving leaders have to worry about their continued survival, the likelier they might be to enter a truce that would win them some reprieve. So the big question is what the man who really calls the shots here for Hamas, and that is Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, what he thinks of this event. He is presumably deep underground in hiding. There have been reports indeed that his his colleagues in Hamas abroad who have been leading up these truce talks with Israel through mediators have at times themselves had trouble communicating with him because he is so deep in hiding in the Gaza Strip. So to a degree, he's been siloed off from the rest of the Hamas leadership. He may feel, in fact, a bit safer given conditions in the Gaza Strip, given that he might be surrounded by hostages who would provide a degree of protection. But certainly, I imagine he knows about this, and certainly he'll be wondering whether his path forward would be through a truce or indeed canceling the truce and telling Israel all bets are now off.
Yeah, very difficult to ascertain what is going to happen from here. Let me just bring it back to that airstrike on Beirut as well, in Dahi, Hezbollah stronghold. And it emerged later in the evening that Fuad Shukr, who is one of the senior commanders in the Hezbollah militia, had been killed in that attack as well. The instant reaction there was that because it was a very targeted strike, it reduced the possibility of that all-out or full-scale war that people had been so concerned of in the region. How does that calculus change now that we also know that Ismail Haniyeh has been killed as well?
I think what we've seen here is Israel, which has widely said, and I think quite credibly, that it has been the focus of an extensive proxy war by Iran. Israel is now taking the war across the borders, a war to the proxies, and indeed in this case is actually killing the leader of one of those proxies inside Iran. I think Israel's objective here was to change the calculus for Iran without necessarily tripping this into a direct confrontation with Iran, which would indeed be unprecedented. We had a sampling of it on April 13th, when Iran directly shelled Israel with some 300 long-distance missiles and drones. In this situation, Iran's security would appear to have been breached. It's lost face in terms of a host to one of its allies. However, this is not really a direct Iranian asset which has been hit by Israel. So the calculus here, while indeed Hezbollah in Lebanon might be thinking very hard about how to retaliate and when it will retaliate for the killing of the man who was effectively the top Hezbollah general, the chief of staff, if you like, it might actually have to heed what Iran thinks, given that the Iranians will now wonder whether Israel is ready, prepared, and capable of taking this war to the next level, which would mean sustained attacks on Iranian targets and on Iranian soil. So one has to decide really at what level the decision making is being made on the side of the parties arrayed against Israel here. It would appear, we thought last night indeed, that the attack in Beirut was a one-off for Israel in terms of basically retaliating for Saturday's rocket attack on the Golan Heights that killed 12 children. That might be the case when it comes to Hezbollah itself. On the other hand, Israel appears to be signaling that it still has an open account with Iran, that it's still ready to take this further if the parties against it decide themselves to take it further. I imagine we'll see now a few hours at least, perhaps days, of very, very careful deliberation on all sides as to where this is leading.